His secretary left without saying goodbye. The Mafia boss finally learned why. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy emotional stories like this one, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. It only takes a second, it's completely free, and your support helps us create more heartfelt and unforgettable stories. We'd also love to know where you're watching from today, so leave your city or country in the comments below and say hello. We truly appreciate your support. Now, let's get back to our story. The most dangerous goodbye isn't the one you hear. It's the one you never see coming. I didn't realize that until the Monday Claire Bennett failed to walk through my office door. For 5 years, she had arrived every weekday at exactly 7:45 a.m., always carrying a paper cup of black coffee for herself and another for me. Even though I never once thanked her for remembering I hated sugar. My name is Adrian Moretti, and people across New York knew me as a man who could control boardrooms, negotiations, and lives with nothing more than a quiet sentence. My employees feared disappointing me. My rivals avoided crossing me. Nothing in my world happened without my approval. At least, that's what I believed. That Monday morning, the elevator chimed at precisely 8 o'clock. My assistant's desk remained empty. Her chair was perfectly pushed in, her keyboard spotless, her favorite navy blue cardigan folded neatly across the backrest, as though she had planned to return after lunch. I glanced toward the reception area, expecting to hear her soft footsteps or the familiar sound of her organizing my impossible schedule. Instead, there was only silence. It irritated me more than I cared to admit. I checked my watch. 8:10, 8:15. My phone remained free of missed calls. Claire had never been late. Not once. By 8:30, I called Human Resources. No answer from Claire. No emergency contact had responded either. They promised to keep trying. I ended the call without another word. My irritation quickly turned into cold frustration. She should have known better than to disappear without notice. I walked into her office myself, something I had never done before. Her desk looked exactly as it always had. Every folder was labeled with perfect handwriting. Every appointment for the next 2 weeks had already been color-coded. Even the fountain pen I had misplaced 3 days earlier rested beside my calendar, exactly where I would naturally reach for it. My eyes settled on a single white envelope placed in the center of her desk. No dramatic message. No explanation. Just my name written in careful script. Adrian. I opened it expecting excuses. Inside was only one sentence. I resign. Thank you for everything. Claire Bennett. That was all. No apology. No reason. No goodbye. I folded the paper once before slipping it into my jacket pocket, convincing myself I didn't care. Employees left all the time. Capable people could always be replaced. By noon, 3 candidates had already been scheduled to interview for her position. Business continued. Meetings filled the afternoon. Contracts were signed. Phones rang. Yet every hour, I found myself glancing toward the empty desk outside my office. Nobody knocked before entering the way Claire always had. Nobody remembered I preferred conference room blinds half open after lunch because bright sunlight gave me headaches. Nobody quietly replaced the dying white orchids on the windowsill before I even noticed they had wilted. It wasn't until I reached for my evening medication and realized someone had already placed the bottle beside my glass of water before she left that morning that an unfamiliar feeling settled deep inside my chest. For the first time in years, the most organized office in Manhattan felt strangely abandoned, and I still had no idea that Claire hadn't walked away because she wanted to leave. She had disappeared because she believed it was the only way to keep me alive. The interviews began at 9 the next morning. 4 candidates sat outside my office wearing expensive suits and confident smiles, each carrying polished resumes that claimed efficiency, discretion, and exceptional organizational skills. By noon, every one of them had failed. One forgot an important document. Another interrupted a meeting that should never have been disturbed. The third served coffee sweet enough to taste like dessert. The fourth spoke too much, filling silence that never needed filling. I dismissed them all without hesitation. My chief of security leaned against the doorway after the last applicant left. None of them good enough? He asked. No. I answered without looking up. He nodded once and quietly closed the door behind him. The office felt larger than it had ever been. Claire had never tried to impress anyone. She simply noticed things. Tiny things. The kind of details most people overlooked because they believed they were too busy to care. My calendar still ran perfectly because she had organized nearly 3 weeks in advance. Every meeting contained handwritten notes attached to each folder. Every client preference had been highlighted in yellow. One executive preferred sparkling water. Another hated morning meetings. One investor always asked about baseball before discussing business. Claire remembered all of it without ever needing reminders. I had assumed that level of precision came naturally. Now I realized someone had spent countless quiet hours making my life appear effortless. Late that afternoon, I reached for a contract scheduled for signing. The file was already sitting exactly where my hand expected to find it. Inside, a small sticky note caught my attention. The signature page needs the revised attachment from Friday. I almost signed the wrong version. Claire. There was no date. She had left the note before disappearing, anticipating a mistake I had not even known I was about to make. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the skyline outside the window. Manhattan shimmered beneath gray autumn clouds while traffic crawled through the streets below. Thousands of people rushed toward destinations that probably mattered less than they believed. For the first time in years, I found myself wondering what Claire's mornings looked like. Did she stop for coffee somewhere before work because she always arrived carrying 2 cups? Had she taken the subway or driven through traffic while reviewing my schedule in her mind? I realized I did not even know where she lived. I knew the birthdays of corporate partners worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but I could not tell anyone the name of the neighborhood where the woman who had organized half my life went home every night. That realization lingered longer than I expected. As evening settled across the city, I walked past her empty desk again. A small ceramic planter rested beside her monitor. Inside, a single green succulent looked surprisingly healthy despite receiving almost no sunlight. Tucked beneath the pot was a folded grocery receipt with a handwritten reminder on the back. Water every Thursday. Indirect light only. I almost smiled before catching myself. Even after leaving, she was still reminding someone to take care of something living. I poured myself another cup of coffee, only to realize it tasted different. Bitter. Burnt. Wrong. Claire had always replaced the beans every Wednesday afternoon because she knew I preferred a darker roast by the end of the week. Nobody else had noticed. Nobody else had asked. I stood alone in the quiet office holding a cup I no longer wanted, finally understanding that the woman I believed worked for me had quietly been carrying parts of my life that I had never bothered to see. I stopped pretending Claire Bennett had simply accepted another job on the 4th day. That morning, my head of finance walked into my office carrying 3 contracts that should have reached me a week earlier. He looked confused as he placed them on my desk. These were flagged for additional review, he said. Apparently, Claire found accounting errors before they were signed. I opened the first folder. She had attached a single page filled with neat handwritten calculations. One incorrect decimal would have cost the company nearly $2 million. The second contract contained a missing insurance clause that none of our attorneys had noticed. The third included a quiet recommendation to postpone negotiations for 48 hours because one investor had a history of making emotional decisions after quarterly earnings reports. She had been right. Waiting would have saved us another substantial amount. I looked up slowly. Did anyone know she handled all of this? The finance director blinked. We assumed you asked her to. I did not answer because the truth embarrassed me. I had never asked. She simply saw problems before anyone else did and quietly solved them. Later that afternoon, I called my security chief, Daniel Brooks. Tell me everything you know about Claire. He frowned slightly. There is not much to tell. She never caused problems. Never missed work. Never requested special treatment. Everyone respected her. That is not an answer. Daniel hesitated before sliding a slim folder across my desk. This is all we have. I opened it expecting pages of background information. Instead, I found only basic employment paperwork, an emergency contact listed as unavailable, and annual performance reviews that all ended with the same sentence. Exceeds expectations. Reliable beyond measure. I closed the folder with quiet frustration. A woman who had organized every hour of my professional life had somehow remained almost invisible. That evening, the rain returned, tapping softly against the office windows while the city lights reflected across the glass like scattered stars. I stayed long after everyone else had gone home. Something pulled me toward the storage cabinet inside Claire's office. It was almost empty. 1 coffee mug, 2 notebooks, A framed photograph of a golden retriever running through a field beneath a bright summer sky. No people. No family. No explanation. I picked up one of the notebooks, expecting personal thoughts. Instead, every page contained observations about my schedule. Monday. Cancel lunch if meeting exceeds 90 minutes because he forgets to eat afterward. Wednesday. Bring headache medication before the board meeting because fluorescent lights usually bother him. Friday. Do not schedule difficult conversations after 4 o'clock. He always makes better decisions the next morning. My throat tightened unexpectedly. She had studied my habits with remarkable patience, not to control me, but to protect me from myself. Then a folded receipt slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. Across the back she had written a reminder in blue ink. Pick up Mr. Moretti's mother's favorite white lilies before Sunday. He never remembers, but he always regrets forgetting. I stared at the words for a very long time. I had not visited my mother's grave in 3 years without those flowers waiting there. Every birthday, every anniversary, every Mother's Day, I had believed the florist simply remembered my standing order. The realization settled over me like cold rain. It had never been the florist. It had always been Claire. And suddenly I was forced to confront a truth that unsettled me more than any business crisis ever had. The woman I barely noticed had spent years quietly protecting the parts of my life that mattered most, while asking for absolutely nothing in return. The following Tuesday began with an unexpected visitor. My attorney, William Carter, stood outside my office holding a sealed envelope that had been delivered by certified mail exactly 1 week after Claire resigned. It was addressed to you personally, he said as he placed it on my desk. The sender requested that it not be delivered unless she was no longer employed here. My heartbeat slowed in a way that felt strangely heavy. The handwriting on the front belonged to Claire. Calm, precise, familiar. I waited until William left before breaking the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter and a small silver flash drive. The letter began without greeting. If you are reading this, then I succeeded in leaving before you noticed what was happening around you. I read the first sentence twice before continuing. You are probably angry with me. You deserve an explanation, but I could never give it while I was sitting outside your office because you would have tried to stop me. And if you had tried, everything I worked to prevent would have happened anyway. I lowered the paper for a moment, staring through the rain gathering against the windows. The city outside looked blurred, as though the weather itself wanted to hide something from me. I forced myself to continue reading. 3 months ago, I realized someone inside the company had been quietly collecting information about your schedule. Not business. Information. Personal routines. Arrival times. Charity events. Family visits. Patterns that only someone close to your daily life could recognize. I reported my concerns through channels that I believed were safe. I was wrong. After that, I started noticing unfamiliar faces watching the building and anonymous messages telling me to stop asking questions. Nothing direct. Nothing that could be proven. Just enough to make me understand that staying beside you would eventually place both of us in danger. I chose the only option that gave me a chance to pull attention away from you. I made myself disappear. My hands tightened around the letter. Every word felt impossible because every word sounded exactly like Claire. Calm. Logical. Completely focused on everyone except herself. She continued, "Please do not waste time looking for me. If people believe I abandoned you, they will eventually lose interest. If they think you are searching for me, they may never stop watching." I folded the letter halfway before unfolding it again, unable to accept what I was reading. Claire had walked away carrying every misunderstanding herself because she believed silence was safer than honesty. Near the bottom of the page, her handwriting became slightly uneven for the first time. There is one more thing I never had the courage to say. Thank you for always treating me with respect. You probably think you never noticed me, but you did in small ways. You remembered how I took my coffee. You made sure I was never working alone after late meetings. You asked the driver to wait whenever it rained because you knew I walked to the subway. Those things mattered more than you realized. I smiled sadly because I had no memory of doing any of them. They had been instinctive, insignificant gestures in my mind. Somehow she had remembered every one. At the very bottom, she wrote one final sentence. Please promise me that if we never meet again, you will finally learn to take care of yourself without someone quietly doing it for you. I looked at the unopened flash drive resting beside the letter. For the first time since Claire disappeared, I realized the truth waiting inside might change everything I thought I knew about the woman who had quietly walked out of my life without asking for anything except my future. I stared at the silver flash drive for almost an hour before finally plugging it into my computer. The screen remained black for a moment before Claire appeared sitting at what looked like her apartment dining table. She wore the same pale blue sweater she often kept folded over the back of her office chair. Her hair was tied loosely behind her head, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked tired. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally drained in a way I had never allowed myself to notice. She smiled gently at the camera. "If you are watching this, then I managed to leave before you found out." She paused to steady her breathing before continuing. "I know you are probably trying to solve this like every other problem in your life. Please do not. This is not a business negotiation. It is not a contract. It is simply someone making the hardest decision she has ever made." I leaned closer without realizing it. She looked directly into the camera, and somehow it felt as though she were looking directly at me. "You once told a client that leadership means protecting people even when they never learn what you sacrificed for them. I do not think you realized I was standing outside your office when you said it." A quiet laugh escaped her. I remembered those words because they reminded me of you. My chest tightened. I had no memory of saying them, yet she had carried them with her. "Please do not blame yourself," she continued softly. "You trusted people because you believed loyalty could be earned. That is not weakness. It is the reason so many people quietly admire you." Her eyes drifted toward the window beside her before returning to the camera. "There is something I need to confess. Every morning I bought 2 coffees, but I only charged one to the company because I wanted your day to begin with something familiar. Every Sunday, I ordered white lilies because I knew you would never forgive yourself if your mother's grave was empty. Every winter, I left cough medicine in your desk because you always ignored being sick until it became impossible to hide." I lowered my eyes. The memories arrived one after another. The medicine that had somehow appeared before every cold. The fresh flowers. The coffee that was always exactly the right temperature. I had accepted every kindness without ever asking who made them happen. Claire smiled again, though sadness lingered behind it. "You once apologized because you forgot my birthday. The truth is, you never knew when it was. I only told everyone you remembered because I wanted them to see the man I knew instead of the man they assumed you were." I covered my mouth with one hand as silence filled the office around me. My reflection stared back from the dark window beside the monitor, looking older than I remembered. Claire folded her hands together. "If life is kind, maybe one day you will slow down long enough to notice the people quietly walking beside you. They rarely ask for recognition. They simply hope to be seen before it is too late." The video ended without music, without dramatic words, without goodbye. The screen returned to black, leaving only my reflection and the sound of rain tapping against the glass. For years, I believed power meant having the answer to every question. Yet sitting alone in that office, surrounded by everything Claire had quietly built for me, I realized there was one truth that no amount of influence, wealth, or authority could change. I had spent 5 years looking at the woman who understood me better than anyone else, and I had never truly seen her at all. The morning after I watched Claire's recording, I did something I had never done before. I canceled every meeting on my calendar. My executive team stared at me as though I had announced the sun would not rise. For years, my schedule had been treated as something sacred, every minute measured, every conversation timed. None of it mattered anymore. I called Daniel Brooks into my office and closed the door. "I need you to find Claire." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the letter still resting beside my computer. "She asked you not to." I know what she asked. "Then why are we ignoring her wishes?" His question lingered in the silence longer than I expected. Finally, I answered honestly. "Because I need to know she is safe." Daniel studied my face before giving a slow nod. "We will search quietly. No unnecessary attention. If she wanted to disappear, we owe her that much." By the end of the week, every lead had reached the same conclusion. Claire Bennett had simply vanished. Her apartment lease had ended. Her bank account had been closed. Her phone number no longer existed. Even her forwarding address led to a rented mailbox that had already expired. It was as though she had carefully erased herself from the city without leaving a single careless footprint behind. I drove past the small coffee shop where she used to stop every morning before work. The barista recognized me immediately. "You are looking for Claire, aren't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She smiled with surprising warmth. She always said you would come eventually. My heart skipped. Did she leave anything? The young woman disappeared into a cabinet beneath the counter before returning with a plain white envelope. She told me to give you this only if you came here yourself. My hands hesitated before opening it. Inside was nothing but a receipt from 6 months earlier. On the back, Claire had written a single sentence. Thank you for finally noticing where I bought the coffee. I laughed softly before realizing my eyes had filled with tears. Even now, she was gently reminding me how little I had observed while believing I noticed everything. The barista poured a fresh cup and placed it in front of me without asking for payment. She talked about you sometimes, she said. I looked up quickly. What did she say? The young woman smiled. Not much. Just little things. She said you always pretended you did not like birthdays, but every year you secretly donated to children's hospitals instead of celebrating yourself. She said you never ate breakfast unless someone put food on your desk. She said people misunderstood you because they only listened to your words instead of watching your actions. I wrapped both hands around the warm paper cup. Somehow a stranger knew more about the version of me Claire carried in her heart than I knew about the woman herself. As I stood to leave, the barista called after me. She also said something else. I turned back. She said if you ever came looking for her, it would mean you had finally become the man she always believed you could be. I walked back into the cold autumn air carrying coffee that tasted exactly the way it always had. But for the first time I understood that I was no longer searching because I needed Claire to organize my life. I was searching because somewhere along the way, without either of us saying the words out loud, she had quietly become the heart I never realized I was living without. 3 weeks passed before the first real clue appeared. Daniel knocked once before entering my office, carrying a thin manila folder instead of his usual tablet. He placed it gently on my desk without speaking. Inside was a receipt from a small bookstore nearly 300 miles north of Manhattan in a quiet town I had never visited. The purchase itself meant nothing. A used novel, herbal tea, and a journal. What mattered was the signature on the customer loyalty card. Claire Bennett. My pulse quickened for the first time in weeks. Daniel folded his arms. We verified it 3 different ways. She was there 11 days ago. I closed the folder carefully. No security team. No convoy. Just you and me. He nodded once. The drive took almost 6 hours, carrying us farther away from the skyline that had defined my entire adult life. Towering glass buildings slowly disappeared behind forests dressed in shades of orange and crimson. Small towns replaced endless traffic. Local diners replaced expensive restaurants. The air itself felt different, cleaner somehow, quieter. Claire had chosen a place where nobody cared about status or power. We arrived just before sunset. The bookstore sat on a peaceful corner across from a tiny public library and a bakery that smelled of fresh cinnamon bread. The owner remembered her immediately. The young woman with the kind smile, she asked. She comes in every Thursday after volunteering at the community center. My heart skipped. Does she still live here? The woman smiled politely, but shook her head. I never asked personal questions. She seems happy. That is enough for me. Happy. The word echoed inside my mind long after we left the store. Happy without me. I was not sure whether that comforted me or hurt more. We followed the only lead we had. The community center stood at the edge of town beside a small park where children chased one another beneath towering maple trees. Their laughter drifted through the cool afternoon air. I stopped walking the moment I saw her. Claire stood beneath a wooden pavilion wearing a simple cream-colored sweater and blue jeans. Nothing like the tailored business clothes I had seen her wear every weekday for 5 years. Her hair rested loosely over her shoulders while she knelt beside a little girl, helping her paint bright blue flowers across a sheet of paper. She laughed at something the child whispered, and the sound reached me before she ever noticed I was there. It was soft, genuine, completely free. I realized with painful clarity that I had never heard her laugh like that inside my office. She slowly looked up, almost as though she had sensed someone watching. Our eyes met across the park. Time seemed to stop. Surprise crossed her face first, then concern, then something warmer that disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. She excused herself from the children and walked toward me at an unhurried pace. When she finally stopped a few feet away, neither of us spoke. The autumn wind gently lifted a strand of her hair across her face. She brushed it behind her ear exactly the way she always had during long meetings. "You found me," she said quietly. I nodded. "I was hoping you had found peace." She looked toward the children laughing behind her before answering. "I did." There was no anger in her voice. No resentment. No accusation. Somehow that kindness made my regret even heavier. I searched for the perfect apology, the perfect explanation, but every carefully chosen sentence disappeared before reaching my lips. Standing in front of Claire for the first time since she left, I finally understood that some distances were never measured in miles. They were measured in all the words we waited too long to say. Claire folded her hands in front of her and offered the same calm smile that had greeted me every morning for 5 years. "You should not have come, Adrian." Her voice carried no bitterness, only quiet concern. I looked around the park where children laughed beneath brilliant autumn trees. Their paintings covered long picnic tables with bright colors that looked almost impossible after the gray world I had been living in. "I needed to know you were all right," I answered. She nodded gently. "I am." We stood there surrounded by ordinary life. A father pushed his daughter on a swing. An elderly couple shared a bench while feeding birds. Somewhere nearby, a church bell echoed across the small town. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary, and suddenly I understood why Claire had chosen this place. Here she was, simply Claire, not someone's assistant, not the woman carrying invisible responsibilities, just herself. "I read your letter," I said quietly, "and I watched the recording." She lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at me. "Then you know why I left." I shook my head slowly. "No, I know why you believed you had to leave. That is different." Silence settled between us. Finally, I took a slow breath. "I spent weeks convincing myself I came here to bring you back." A faint sadness crossed her face, but she did not interrupt. "I was wrong." Her expression softened with surprise. "I did not come to ask you to return to my office." I looked toward the children gathered around the painting tables. One little boy proudly held up a picture covered in bright yellow stars while Claire smiled at him with the kind of warmth I had never realized she carried inside her every day. "I came because I needed to tell you something I should have said years ago." She remained perfectly still. "Thank you." The words sounded painfully small compared to everything she had done. "Thank you for protecting me when I never noticed. Thank you for reminding me to visit my mother. Thank you for every cup of coffee, every calendar, every quiet kindness I accepted without understanding who made my life easier." Claire blinked several times, her eyes beginning to glisten. "You do not owe me anything," she whispered. "Actually, I do." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I owe you the truth." I reached into my coat and removed a folded envelope. "This is my resignation from 3 corporate boards and 2 organizations that demanded every hour of my life. Starting next month, I am reducing my workload by half." She stared at me in disbelief. "Why?" "Because you were right." I laughed softly at myself. I never learned how to take care of my own life. I thought success meant sacrificing everything until nothing remained except work. I looked around the peaceful town once more. "You showed me there is another way." The afternoon breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves between us. "I am not asking you to come back with me, Claire." My voice remained steady despite the weight pressing against my chest. "Stay here if this is where your heart has found peace. Live the life I never realized you deserved. I will not ask you to give that up for me." Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. "You have changed." I nodded. "Not enough yet, but I finally know which direction I want to walk." For the first time since we met, there were no schedules to discuss, no meetings waiting, no responsibilities demanding her attention. There were only 2 people standing beneath golden autumn trees, and somehow letting her choose her own future became the greatest act of love I had ever learned. 1 year later, I drove back to the same small town without calling ahead. This time there were no questions weighing on my mind, no desperate search, no fear of arriving too late. The road felt familiar now, lined with maple trees that had once again turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson. My life in New York had changed more than I ever believed possible. I no longer measured my worth by the number of meetings on my calendar or the size of the deals waiting on my desk. Entire divisions of my business had been handed to people I trusted. The charitable foundation that had once existed only on paper now funded children's education, community health programs, and small libraries across neighborhoods that had long been forgotten. Every decision had been guided by one simple Question I had learned from Claire without her ever saying the words aloud. Does this make someone's life a little easier? I parked beside the same community center where I had first found her. Children's laughter drifted through the open windows exactly as I remembered. Inside, colorful paintings covered the walls, each one proudly signed by a small hand that believed the world was still full of possibilities. Claire stood near the back of the room, helping a little girl tie a ribbon around a handmade picture frame. She looked up and smiled the moment she saw me. There was no surprise this time. Somehow it felt as though she had known I would return, not because she had been waiting, but because we had both finally learned that the best things in life never needed to be rushed. After the children left, we walked together beneath the quiet afternoon sky toward a small hill overlooking the town. The autumn air carried the familiar scent of pine trees and fresh bread from the nearby bakery. Neither of us felt the need to fill every moment with conversation. The silence between us had become comfortable instead of uncertain. Claire looked at me with the same thoughtful eyes that had once quietly watched over every detail of my life. "You look different," she said. I laughed softly. "I finally sleep more than 4 hours a night." She smiled. "I can tell." We sat on a wooden bench facing the sunset as warm light spread across the valley below. I reached into my jacket pocket and handed her a small envelope. She opened it carefully. Inside was a simple business card. It carried only my name and one title: Director, Moretti Community Foundation. She looked at me with quiet confusion. "No chief executive officer?" she asked. I shook my head. I discovered I no longer needed impressive titles to know who I was. She folded the card and slipped it back into the envelope. "I am proud of you, Adrian." Those 5 words meant more to me than every award I had collected during my career. I looked toward the horizon before speaking. "I am not here to ask you to come back as my secretary." She smiled gently. "I know. I am here to ask whether you would consider walking beside me instead. Not because I need someone to organize my life anymore, but because I cannot imagine building the next chapter without the person who taught me how to truly live it." Claire did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for my hand, her fingers warm against the cool autumn air. That quiet gesture carried more meaning than any promise either of us could have spoken. As the last light settled over the valley, I finally understood the lesson life had spent years trying to teach me. You can build an empire through ambition. You can earn respect through discipline. But the people who change your heart rarely arrive with grand speeches. Sometimes they simply place a cup of coffee on your desk every morning, quietly love you through ordinary days, and hope you notice before goodbye becomes the loudest sound of all.